Welcome everyone. This is Taco Movie Talks. I am joined here with Matthew, aka Warchamp, and we are here to discuss Eric Rohmer, a very famous French New Wave director. Matt, first of all, how are you? And second of all, how did you kind of come to experience Eric Rohmer's style first?
Well, I think I just came about him when I was getting into all the other new wave directors. And I forget what the first movie of his I watched was. I think it was The Green Ray. And for some reason, I think I need to watch that one because it didn't leave as big of an impact on me as a lot of his other ones. But I started watching some of his other movies, but what really got me liking him was actually seeing one of the movies today. We're going to talk about A Summer's Tale at the local theater that kind of plays like older movies around here. They were showing it, and I went to go see it. I think just randomly, I was like, "This looks pretty cool," and I like the summer theme, and I ended up really, really liking it. And after I saw that, I think I started getting more into his other movies.
In the two movies we're going to cover, A Summer's Tale, which you mentioned, and My Night at Mauds, you get, I think, a good representation of how good his cinematography is, and I'm talking about Eric Romer's cinematography through
Yeah, yeah.
through color and black and white. But I want to ask you, Matt, what are some aspects that you find to be good with Romer, and then some aspects that are really magnified in the French New Wave style?
Well, so one aspect I think that kind of goes through all of his movies is they're usually about relationships, and there's a lot of talking, and as you could see through both these movies, the script is really important. It's kind of like people define there's like that kind of Linklater-ish wave. People call it like mumblecore, and have you heard of that before?
I think I have heard of it, and it's a funny kind of expression for it. But I think why people like that is it does seem to represent true interactions, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think so. I've heard people, I think they might have gotten a little dissatisfied with it after like the mumblecore genre, just because I think people were maybe just relying too much on the script. But what they were really trying to copy is movies like, these two we're discussing today. Because I think those kind of, or these two at least, do a really good job of creating like a really interesting story and like character study just through dialogue alone. I think there it's like a good marker of success, these two movies, of like how that can actually work really well. And then in terms of like the French New Wave, I think the whole, kind of how these feel like, where's the plot? It could feel aimless if you're not paying attention, or if you're just focusing on like what's going to happen. It's just kind of one of those movies, like many other French Wave movies, where you just kind of have to watch it and go along with the ride and like really try and engage with the dialogue and what it's saying.
I like one of the words that you used, which is aimless, and I think in film that does have a negative connotation, but I think when you say it in terms of describing French New Wave, it does have this free flowingness that it makes you feel like anything is possible in the movies. And I have a lot less experience with French New Wave comparable to you. I've only really seen Godard and now Romer, but with Romer, I have come to really enjoy this style because, like what you were saying, when you become engaged with the dialogue, which I found really easy in the two films that we're about to discuss, it can really be kind of moving and feel like there are a lot of points being made, and I think he achieved a lot in these two films. I think the kind of prophetic nature that he was able to achieve in My Night at Mauds was really really special, and that resonated huge for me. But there is like a sense of the My Summer's Tale, or A Summer's Tale, resonates with me because it would almost was able to kind of conjure memories and give like a feeling of deja vu through it. Like I felt that summer feel, and I think even if it wasn't summer as we were recording that, I would have felt that just because it almost puts you in the movie, and both of those things I think are very special for any director to achieve.
Yes, yes. And it's, I think that might have been why I liked it so much when I saw it in a theater, just because it was, you have that really great like cinematography that I feel like captures summertime, at least in this movie, maybe better than any other movie set in the summer that I've seen. And it's just like also you were talking about how you can kind of relate to it. Like, just going to the beach, it kind of feels like when you're watching the movie, like in a way you're at the beach just because it's very like the color grading maybe is the best way to describe it. It's very like white kind of like when you're at the beach, everything's a little brighter. That's kind of how the movie feels. And then also, what you were saying about how it kind of is nostalgic in a way. Even
Mm.
if like I've never visited France, I've never visited that beach, but it kind of reminds me of like, summer vacation, um, going to hang out. Like I never really have experiences of meeting a bunch of different girls in the same summer, like three different girls and kind of juggling that. But like I can still relate kind of what he's going through to stuff I've that's happened to me in the past before.
Yeah, and what I really respect and admire about that is I think to differing extents, like directors are always trying to conjure that feeling, whether it's just for you to empathize with a certain character or be able to relate to the character. And he did it in such a way where you don't even realize it until afterwards, or you're so engaged with the material that it's really in retrospect that I realized, like, I felt some of the emotions that they were portraying from the main character, like feelings of being left out, and it portrays it so well where it can almost like put you back in the mindset that you may have had if you've experienced that yourself. And I think it's such a universal emotion, like being on vacation for the majority of people, like you can feel that, you have nostalgia towards that, and then like being left out, that too. And I think there's a lot of other scenarios like that he paints, and it's just why that movie, in my mind, is so great. It is being able to depict that in such a effective way, really.
Yeah, so like two things I kind of want to mention. One, I've done a lot of reading up on this movie because it's one of my favorite movies. And I learned that the director, this is kind of like a movie that he made as sort of a memoir, like it was based on his own life. Like so from
Mm.
what I remember reading, he was in college, and I think he was studying mathematics and liked making music, just like the main character. And so I think the film is sort of supposed to be a very like nostalgia driven story
Mm.
from Rohmer himself. So, and then the other thing I wanted to comment on was I think the most relatable thing for me, and this is just honestly because of my personality type, was just the whole indecisiveness of the main character.
Mm.
Like he doesn't know really what he wants to do, and he's kind of just trying to please everyone and make everyone happy, and he keeps changing his mind. And he, it's fun. Like the ending to me is so funny, like what he decides to do, because like to me, that's the kind of thing I would also do. Like I would just be like, I'm not gonna try and like juggle all these like tasks or in this case like people at one time. I'm just gonna like exit and leave the situation completely.
I and you know, I find that to be really funny too. And so like one thing I wanted to touch on is it's really impressive for Rohmer because he seems to be kind of like a renaissance man of sorts now that you say like that he studied mathematics you know in college and also kind of dipped his toes into music and I think once we get into the second movie that we're going to discuss, he obviously has a liking for philosophy as well and talks a lot about Pascal. And I think there was another philosopher that, they talked a lot about. I could be, well, let me ask you this actually before I go too far down this rabbit hole. Matt, is Pascal, is he a philosopher or am I wrong? And is he actually a mathematician?
He's both.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So I find it really interesting like that he is very well versed in all of these areas and I think that comes across really well in all of these movies and I don't want to give the wrong impression for anyone who's listening to this who may have not seen this movie. I don't think this movie at all, or even my Night at Mauds, I don't think it plays off pretentious whatsoever. I think it's actually really grounded, really down to earth, and for me, and we were discussing this actually, Matt, before we started recording. I find this to be like a an amazing like romance movie for me because it plays so realistically and that probably is deeply seated in the fact that it's playing off of a real life memory from Rohmer. But I think oftentimes romances, especially, can kind of they can get a little bit out of hand and throw in some frankly ridiculous plot points to try to keep everything heightened. But the dialogue is what is able to keep this movie going. And I like that you have dialogue that is good enough to carry the movie and you kind of show respect for the audience by not by keeping it grounded rather.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of it is just because this feels like a movie that's, or a romance type movie that's realistic in the way that, like, you don't, like most romance movies, you have the two people that are meant to be together. And, there's like the happy ending where they do get together in the end. And there's like the more sad ending where, it's star-crossed lovers, they can't stay together. And that's kind of like the two kind of main themes. And this is, I'd say, more realistic in the way that, like, there's not two people here that are like completely in love and have fallen for each other. He's like picking and choosing, and he doesn't really know what he wants. And I feel like the other people, like the three girl characters, also don't really know what they want either. Everyone's kind of confused, and I think that represents, their, I'd say, early to mid 20s, or if they're in college, it'd be early 20s. Um, like that mindset, like in you barely see, I would say, uh, people, at least people who are apt to like traveling around like these people are, have like a single romantic relationship that they just stay in forever. It's like these people are, going to see different things, moving around. They all kind of talk about their old, like recent partners that they've had. It's it very much evokes a more realistic, like early 20s, mid 20s dating lifestyle in my mind.
Yeah, and in a way, in the way that you described it, and in the way that Rohmer portrays it, it feels like a coming of age of sorts, where people are trying to find themselves. And I think you and I can both attest to this. That time period is very integral in trying to figure out who you truly are in all aspects of life. And I think that's why that resonates so powerfully with audience members.
Yeah, yeah. And it really resonated powerfully with me. It's funny because I loved this movie when I first saw it, but then kind of when I had like I went through a like breakup and I had been dating for a long time, like a same person for a long time. And then when I was single again, I like thought about this movie and I was like, wow, like this movie's like kind of realistic in the way that you think about your past relationships and like possible future relationships. Like you're kind of thinking of like say, especially when you're in university and you're meeting a lot of people, like say you've met a bunch of different girls through your friend group or guys, either way. And you're thinking of all of them and you're like, wow, I kind of like this person for this reason. Oh, but they're also kind of cool and fun to hang out with. And you don't, it's, and also in that age, you're doing stuff like going off away for the summer and you're leaving college or university. And it's just, your life is very crazy. Like I think what I'm trying to say is kind of like my first point I made that like when you're in this age group in that early 20s stage, you're not usually settled down with one person.
Mm. What I really enjoyed about the ending that you talked a little bit about is, and I think it's intentionally portrayed this way, that it wasn't like an immediate epiphany on behalf of the main character, but I think why this story kind of stuck in the mind of Rohmer and made him want to put it on the big screen is because I think it was an integral moment for him, like learning about himself. And he kind of learned not only a lesson, but also like what was truly important to him as well. And I felt like that was probably the best way to end this. And I think, there's probably people who like the more, I guess, formulaic style of a romance film, and that they wanted to see him end up with Margot, probably, I would imagine. And that's certainly what I was expecting too, but I like that they chose not to go that direction.
Yeah, because you want, or at least I want, him to kind of end up with Margot because she seems to be like the maybe you could say like the coolest one or the one who's most confident in herself. She seems to also like, you know, I think is the main character's name is Gaspard, if I'm
Mm-hmm.
right, Gaspar. She seems to like him, but it's like that constant like push and pull. Like, they kiss a little bit and then it's like they're just friends, and it's very much a strange relationship. But at the same time, she's seems much more like she's actually into and likes Gaspard, I'd say, than the other two girls.
Yeah, I see that for sure. The one who is traveling Spain definitely seems not to take him very seriously, and the one that he goes boating with, it seems like she likes him too, but she also kind of seems like a serial dater. So, you can imagine that that might not end well either, and like that might just be kind of a fling. And there might be an ulterior motive too, that she wants to go to that is it or croissant, I think is what it's called. And Margot seems like genuinely interested in him, and it's a really weird push and pull, like you say. It seems as though when he kind of portrays himself as like a sad sap, she doesn't seem as interested, and she seems to almost gain interest as he starts to juggle the other two women, which I find to be interesting and maybe also kind of realistic in a way. Like that's when she really seems to gain the most attraction for him. They obviously click on a like a personal level, but she doesn't seem to be as attracted in him until that seems to take more traction. And then ultimately, it seems like his ways, which attracted her to begin with, are ultimately what are his dismay in the end, because he didn't take her seriously enough, and she had a boyfriend that I think she saw solid she saw a solid relationship there. I love the dynamic of all three relationships throughout.
Yeah, because it's so like messy and not like nothing's for sure. It seems like, he's juggling, all these three girls, but it seems like they're also juggling multiple people themselves. And so it's like, and I also think what you said about, how she becomes more attracted to him when, she sees that he is like out with other girls. Um, I think that's just like human nature, from my experience with guys and girls. If the, person you're attracted to is getting a lot of attention, it's going to make you want them more just because, the general trope of people want what they can't have. And when something's rarer, anything is more rare, you're going to want it more. That whole kind of dynamic is definitely very true in dating, and it really plays out in this movie. But yeah, I think the most interesting relationship is between Margot and Gaspard because you have the girlfriend, and that just seems like they're together because like there's not really anything that seems to hold them together. It's like when she finally meets up with him, they just kind of bicker among, and then they like apologize to each other. And then I think it's funny because right before he leaves, he's like, "Oh, like my plan was to agree to." I think Lena is his girlfriend's name. My plan was to like agree to go with Lena, but I knew she would turn me down, so I also or she would like ditch me, so I also accepted going to hang out with this other girl on the same day, and my plan the entire time was just to go with that girl and not actually go with Lena. So it's like he's playing like all these cards at once, and there's so much stuff he has to juggle in his head. It seems like it's overwhelming, and it's kind of like weighing on him. But it's also like you look at the other side, it's like, well, this is like a great, problem to have. You have like these three girls that all look like models that, you could try and date, and he just seems to screw everything up. And I think that is like the most relatable part.
Yeah, I think whether it's relationships or not, everyone can relate to the fact when you try to have it all and then you end up blundering everything is I think I know for sure I related to that, and I thought it was great, and I thought the performance for everyone was really good, and I loved how pensive Gaspard was the whole time. Like he was always kind of trying to calculate because, like you said, he had so many moving parts at all times. He kind of, if he didn't plan ahead, he was gonna get bombarded, and he even with that planning, he did get bombarded for sure. But I want to ask you, Matt, are there any additional kind of aspects of this movie that you would want to touch upon?
Oh, I just actually wanted to make one quick like comment about how this relates to I think even more so. Yeah, this came out in '96, but I think this relates even more to today's like dating culture. And I think that's because of, the Instagram and dating apps and whatnot. Because now it's like you have all these options online, or people seeing each other on Instagram and messaging each other, or you get a ton of matches on a dating app and you're messaging like or all these different people at once. And it's more true for women online than guys, just because that's just the way it is when it comes to online dating. But I think that the reason it relates so much is just because the amount of options you have on the internet is way more than just, oh, I'm visiting this town for the summer and I just happen to meet like a couple of these people. Now if you go to that town for the summer and you're like an attractive like a very attractive person, like anyone in this movie, you could easily get on the dating apps and just find like, five people or 10 people within the span of a few days, and end up, meeting up with a good chunk of those. So I think that whole like indecisiveness and, having all these options and none really being correct or not really knowing what you want is, I think, a heightened thing in like the dating world in 2023.
I completely agree. Um, and I think if they are meeting with all of those options, I I think there is a lot to be learned, like in this story, and I think the only thing that could differ is that you might not be meeting with them; you're only talking with them online. And this movie kind of points out the potential loss of development that could happen if that were to be the case, because it's through those discussions and those interactions that it seems like Rohmer, by proxy of Gaspard, learned the most about himself. And I think that's what this is trying to depict, and it did it really well, I thought, and I really liked it. I gave this one a 4 out of 5. Matt, what did you give A Summer's Tale?
This is, one of my favorite movies. This was a rewatch for me. Right when I watched it the first time in the theater, I immediately knew it was a five-star movie for me. So yeah, 5 out of 5 for me. This has been one of my favorites for probably like a year or two now.
The next movie that we have is My Night at Mauds. Let me ask you, Matt, did you end up seeing My Night at Mauds after you watched A Summer's Tale and you enjoyed it so much and you wanted to watch more Romero, or how did you kind of find this movie?
I think, if I remember correctly, like I said, the first Romare movie I watched was The Green Ray, and then I might have watched this one second. I can't quite remember. I think I saw it before A Summer's Tale, but I just remember, watching it and thinking the story was very good, and I think this is the most accessible Romare movie in the sense that like there's a more of a real plot if you pay attention. Like it can feel aimless, but there's like a message, more of a message here.
Yeah, and I want to dive into the heart of it because I I think this is right up your alley as far as philosophy goes, and I think the entirety of this movie revolves around Pascal's wager, which is something discussed at great length throughout this movie, and it kind of drives that thought into your head. And I think that's such a brilliant point for Romer because it gives you the lens through which to watch the film and kind of dissect it. Because the heart of this movie is really one about religion, which I find to be really interesting, and that is actually kind of the basis that I think Pascal's wager was like given to the public. I think that's how it was used, but I think it is used also as a means to look at relationships in this film. And that was kind of the way that I took it, because our main character is trying to go for the safest relationship, or maybe the most fulfilling relationship in his mind, even though it's maybe a bit of a long shot, just because he doesn't really know the woman beyond just seeing her on the motorcycle. Yet he has this great connection with Maud, and something that, she's clearly interested in him, and he seems to be interested in her as well. Yet he kind of plays into Pascal's wager and goes for the long shot because of the potential payout. And it also kind of suits his kind of religious beliefs as well. Uh, Let me ask you, Matt, did you kind of look at it that way when you watched this film?
Yeah, not the first time. I would say the first time I actually didn't really catch all that. Like I remember I thought the philosophy part was interesting, but the second time around, like when I watched it yesterday, um I was thinking like more about that because I realized they explain, the thing about, if you wager or are you're familiar with like how the whole Pascal's wager thing works?
I
Which
so I had only heard Pascal's wager in the past, and actually like learned what it was through this movie.
Okay, yeah. Well, what I knew, like I've never really read or studied this philosopher, but we learned a little bit about this, and what I remember learning is kind of the idea that I think this the biggest idea from it is that uh you can either believe in God or not believe in God, and you might as well like believe in God because if you like the benefits of believing and going to it would be like going to heaven and eternal life and whatever else you're promised, while the benefits of like say you don't believe and it is true, then you're going to hell. But if you don't believe and it's not true, then you don't gain anything. Meanwhile, if you do believe and there is no God, then you also you don't really gain anything because it didn't exist. But if you do believe and there is a God, then you have eternal life and go to heaven. So it's like this like balancing, like oh, you might as well like mathematically, like logically, you therefore should believe because it's like it's overall like you have nothing to lose. It's kind of like, do you get what I'm saying? I think that's the whole idea, and I think it does actually, relate to the movie obviously because he's balancing out maybe like, oh, should uh maybe what my greatest chance for the life I want to live or like this straight leading Christian life would be to marry, the blonde Christian girl. But meanwhile, there's, Maud, who's a much more a different personality, very outspoken, interesting. You can tell he's like enamored by her, but at the same time, he's trying to convince himself, oh, it's not going to work with, it will never work with her because she's not like this ideal Catholic Christian girl that he's looking for. So he's kind of like, I think, wagering maybe like those beliefs, those positions.
Yeah, it's like it's kind of weighting your options, where it's like, even if it's the slimmest chance, like you were explaining, that heaven is real or hell is real, they're infinitely great and infinitely bad, right? So you take even the slimmest odds times infinity, and it's like that's still going to greatly outweigh whatever the predominantly, let's say you think there's a 99.9% chance there's no heaven or hell, but it's like timing that by the 99 times 0, it's like the infinity times 0.001 is going to greatly outweigh it. And I think it's a really interesting way to look at it. And I do think a lot of agnostics probably adhere to Pascal's wager without having really known about it previously. And I think it applies perfectly to these two relationships as well. And it's the belief in God in the afterlife that pushes him towards that. And I also think he sees it as like a safer alternative too, that a lot of the friction that could be there with Maud might not exist with this good Christian lady. I think it's an interesting topic to talk about now because Matt, I don't know your presence online if you've heard any of these kind of dating gurus, the Andrew Tates of the worlds, and a lot of the people who kind of fall in line with him. But I mean, they push and promote like the talk to or try to get in a relationship with a good woman over what they would describe as a bad woman like Maud, who has already been in a marriage and has all these opinions and whatnot. I only, table this discussion just because I do think it's interesting that something that came out then is now applicable and very relevant now based on all the online discourse that you hear talking about this very situation.
Yeah, that's interesting you brought that up. I haven't actually thought about that in relation to this movie, but it does make sense. And I was trying to think, I wonder why, like, I wonder if, the whole like Andrew Tate gating guru notion that, you should only marry like a younger, like inexperienced Christian, like home, like person that wants to purely be like a wife and raise kids and is like very religious and like that's the person you have to choose. I think that whole kind of dialogue is like in my mind it's a way to push back against the like newfound, you could say feminism or more
Mm.
liberal type of way of thinking, kind of like Maud, where in today's world that you just don't see a lot of those super conservative types of religious people who, they wait until marriage to have sex, they get married early. You, I think since you don't see that very much anymore due to how culture has changed. I think that like the way that Andrew Tate and all them are talking about it now is like a way they're trying to push back against this new like feminism wave and return back to this older maybe 40s 50s time period. And I think it's just I don't really know what to think of it. I think it's in a way they just do it kind of to be against maybe the grain and like that they have this like fantasy about how back in those times in like the 40s and 50s when more people wanted to follow this way of life, somehow it was better or somehow it made you happier. And I just like I don't really see that as being true.
Yeah, I think and I think what makes this movie really great, and it could have just been like my personal perspective, it could have been my biases coming through, but I found the ending to be kind of enlightening where there the absolute ending doesn't really follow through with on this message, but when Maud and our main character meet, there's a point where it makes you think like, oh, did he make the right choice? And I don't know if you felt that way either, but it makes you have to think about it in your head where it's like weighing the options, like a potential future lifestyle versus like a deep personal connection. and it kind of makes you have to think about that and what you personally weigh more in your own mind.
Yeah, you know what's funny is I somehow didn't remember before the rewatch how great of an ending this was. And you could describe it as, just what you were saying, it's totally based on interpretation. So it could either be a good or a bad ending based on how you think of it. For me, I was just like, forgetting how the movie had ended, I was pretty amazed. And I was like, wow, that is like my favorite kind of ending because it's so up in the air and open ended that you don't there's no you're not supposed to feel really sad or happy about it. It's just like, what do you value more? Would you value being with a partner who's more like Maud, who she does seem to have a lot of dating issues. Like she
Hmm.
said, like one of the things she says to him is well, like, oh, I got married, but it's not going well. And that was like what, less than a year after she had married him. So clearly she has her own relationship troubles. But there's something about the more unsafe path. Like, you, maybe that's not the right word, but what's her name? Is it Natasha, the blonde girl? Or do you remember?
The Tasha does sound right.
It starts with an N, but her, it's like it's the more safe path in a way that, like, you know, they already had kids, but you're gonna marry her, settle down, have kids, and then that's the whole wager thing. Like, you're wagering that's the life you want, so I'm gonna play it safe uh and go with the blonde Christian girl. But for some, it's something about, and I don't really know how to explain it very well, but it's something about Maud is just more intriguing, not just being a super safe, normal uh, type of Christian religious relationship.
Yeah, I agree. Like, because there, it does a great fake out too. So because our main character and his now wife, their conversation is kind of stunted, especially at the beach following that interaction with Maud. And, that kind of led me down towards the path where it's like, it seems like a slightly unfulfilling relationship. And then you find out that that is not the great issue at hand here. It's actually the fact that his wife was the character who's alluded to during the conversation with our main character and Maud at the night in which this film is titled after, where she was the third person in a love affair with Maud's husband. And I found that to be like the freaking cherry on top, in that this film was just really, really well written, really well thought. And just when you thought all the twists and turns were done, like there's one more at the very end. And it adds this wrinkle that it's like, even this person who was like the ideal woman for our main character has kind of this baggage too, and she's not like this pristine version that he had in his mind, but that doesn't seem to, he's able to be at peace with it also. So like you said, it's a mixed bag for an ending, but it's neither happy or sad really.
Okay, so this is kind of embarrassing, but I actually did not catch that part. Um,
Okay.
I was gonna ask you. I didn't. Somehow, like, I left the movie confused, and one of the things I wrote down to ask was, did you realize if he had actually met her before or after? Because Maud kept mentioning she knew who the blonde girl was. What part is that revealed? Because I just did, like that actually is that kind of confirms the questions I had.
It was like dialogue, I think, internal dialogue that was narrated during the discussion after he talked to Maud. and he kind of confirmed. Okay, so there was a discussion between our main character and his wife prior to them getting married, where she talked about she had loved someone who is a married man, and then it's revealed once Maud says, "Oh, I that's the blonde girl, like I've seen her before." And it clicks in his head. He's like, she knows her because she was the other person, and it was just such a brilliant reveal, I thought.
Okay, yes, I remember that moment you're talking about at the end, and I remember because it pauses and he's like, he says, "I was gonna lie and say nothing happened, but then I realized," and I guess I didn't catch that that's what he was realizing. All I was thinking was, okay, he remembers what she told him like 5 years ago or whatever, which was that it seemed like she also had recently been with someone maybe right before they started dating or kind of as they were. And I just didn't connect the dots that that person was also involved with Maud. But that all makes the movie even better in my mind. That's really cool.
Yeah, great writing for sure. Such a good ending. I love the philosophical nature. There was also, and I can't even remember. I believe the philosopher that they were mentioning. They mentioned Pascal at great length, but I believe it was when they were talking about religion, and they would say, "Oh, you're so like." I think it started with a J esque. Like you're like Jameson esque. I don't think it was Jameson, but when talk,
It was Janicism.
yes. Are you familiar with that? Because I am unfamiliar with that.
No, but from what I gleaned from the movie, it sounded like it was like because I remember him talking about Pascal, and he says, did you still follow him when he started moving more into this like Janicism thing? And from what I would think, because I know other philosophers, a lot of philosophers kind of like move through as they age and they continue writing and philosophizing. They move on to like different sorts of ideas a lot, and they'll kind of morph their philosophy as they age. And from what I gathered, it seemed like it was development of kind of Pascal's original thought, and it seemed like maybe more of a intense kind of focus on maybe those Christian values of Pascal's teaching. So I think maybe what like after a while so many people started reading Pascal, he may have kind of created a little like a cult, but not like with all the bad sense of the cult. Maybe just like a group where people really follow certain beliefs that he kind of laid out in his philosophy.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because it seemed to revolve around our main character's kind of religious beliefs, and they were like maybe accusing him of doing so because of Pascal, which he did not seem to like, and wanted to almost put himself above that. So that makes a lot of sense. I love the interpretive nature of this film. I guess I want to ask you, like, which side did you kind of resonate with the most? Like, did you feel like it was a lost opportunity by not being with Maud, or do you feel like the right choice was made?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think, oh man, that's hard. For me personally, I would have gone with Mod just because, like, what I want out of life, I was raised a Christian and I was kind of taught those same kind of values that the main character holds in the movie. Um, but as I got older, I kind of realized that I guess the best way to put it is that lifestyle and outlook is just less fun.
Hmm.
Like, I think life for me is more interesting if I kind of am more free about things. Like, I open up uh, through dialogue and through like and going through different experiences with people. So, for example, like Maud was willing to have all these interesting philosophical conversations with our main character, and they really opened up to each other and they were honest. And she was like, why aren't you like comfortable with this or me here? Or she was like prodding him and trying to figure out, the internally, like he's obviously struggling internally, in my opinion, if he can't just be open and free about how he feels or what he thinks. And I think, for me, I would choose, Mod, just because even if things don't work out in the end, I feel like you learn more about yourself and maybe more about life in general if you're willing to take that kind of risk and be like, the best way to describe it, I guess, in like an analogy, but it seems like Maud and him would have gone on maybe more fun, a more freeing, fun vacation, for example, like to somewhere interesting, like a third world country or somewhere people don't go. Whereas um, marrying just the Christian girl, they might go to the same exact place every year, do the same things, not really take any risks. I don't know if that's the best analogy, but I'm just trying to, compare like the safe life with maybe one that's a little more wild and you get a little more, you're living your life once. I think you should enjoy it to the fullest. I don't think you should uh, make all these rules to constrain yourself.
And like just hearing you talk it through, it kind of put a light bulb above my head, in that I think one of the overlooked natures of Pascal's wager is how repressive the wager is. Does that make sense? Where you can't. It's asking you to not be your true self, and it doesn't weigh that correctly. Does that resonate with you at all?
Yes, yes. I think that's what I'm trying to say. You're not being your true self if you're suppressing all these, like feelings or thoughts that you're having. Like when he's over there talking with Maud, you can tell, at least from his acting, that he clearly wants to sleep with her or do something. But there's like something inside of him that's preventing it. And I think it's that strict morality he's trying to follow. He's saying, no, I'm gonna wait to have this one ideal person that's a Catholic, very religious, very conservative. And it's like, because he's internalized that he has to have that, he's like forcing himself to go after that kind of person, when in reality, it seems like his true self wants someone like Maud, but he's like, something's holding him back, and Maud knows that, and she's trying to pry that out of him, which is what makes that night such a like good, interesting sequence.
Yeah, to my experience, I've never seen a movie like this. It was really, really interesting. And I think, quite frankly, another example between these two movies where Rohmer kind of presents the relationship that the audience is rooting for and wants to see, and then kind of pulls the rug out from under you. And in doing so, you learn a lot about the story, the characters, but also a little bit about yourself. And I really, really appreciated that. And I think, for me, the writing in this one was just really masterfully done. And I think Summer's Tale is really, really great too. It's very, very well written, and what it's able to achieve is really special. But I want to ask you, Matt, before we get to ratings, is there any additional pieces that you want to talk about with My Night at Mauds?
One quick thing I had. This is just something that I thought of. Um, was he because I remember he says beforehand, like at the very start of the movie, the moment he saw the blonde, I keep forgetting her name, Francois or something, he knew he was going to marry her or something like that. But I
Mm-hmm.
felt like after the night at Maud's, did he like finally get the courage to approach her? And was it that night that did it? Because it was the next day where he's at the restaurant and he sees her. Am I right on that?
Yeah, I think it was the very next day that he finally approached her.
Okay, so I was just that was just something interesting to me. I wrote down, I want to make a quick comment on that. It seemed like that night, for whatever reason, also gave him the courage to go up and just approach her.
Well, like I'm gonna propose an idea, and then I want to get your take. Do you think it was like he felt like he passed a test? Like, he was able to hold strong, and that's why he did it? Or do you think that he realized how close he was to like falling into temptation, and that if he didn't do it soon, he might miss out on the opportunity?
Hmm. That's a good question because it did seem like he was trying to pass a test when like he, wrapped himself up in that blanket and was just like, I will not do anything. And then there's that one moment where she kind of Maud goes over to him and he pushes her away and then he wants her again. And then when she says no, he like it's like he tries to leave as quick as possible. So I don't know if I don't know if he was like, okay, like this didn't happen, so I need to make this game plan to set this thing up immediately. I don't know if it was because he felt like he passed that test and he needed to go do it, or if it because he was maybe now worried that he would end up staying with Maud, and so he really needed to go put this other plan in action. I don't know.
I think that's just another piece of what makes this brilliant. Uh, Matt, I gave this one a 4.5 out of 5. What say you on My Night at Mods?
Same rating, 4.5 out of 5 for me. Uh, this is, I would say, this movie, A Summer's Tale, and Love in the Afternoon are my favorite Rohmer movies, and I would highly recommend all of. I mean, there's way more that I love, but those are probably my top three.
He's very, very good. I and I don't. I only do comparisons just because there's endless debates that you can have. And the only one that really I have at hand are the only two French New Wave directors that I've seen, and Godard is one of them. We've talked about him a little bit ourselves on the podcast, and I think I lean towards Rohmer, and I have a shorter sample size with Rohmer. I think I've seen 4 Godard films, and La Pierre Le Fou, I think is what it's called. I
Mhm.
really like that. I thought that was masterfully done, but I think I give My Night at Maud's the nod over that one, and I also really really enjoy A Summer's Tale. I think as of right now, I would give Rohmer just the slight edge over Godard. Do you have any feelings one way or another when kind of comparing those two?
Oh yeah, so I have seen a lot, an embarrassing large amount of both of those directors' films. I've seen probably a little under 30 Godard movies. And I've seen pretty much all of Rohmer's films. I've seen like I think about like 16. And Rohmer is is easily I easily like him more than Godard. Love them both, but there's something about Rohmer's films. You know, they're usually relationship based and romance, kind of like how I mentioned earlier. Um, but I take more away from those movies. Like when I think of beautiful shots, like stills from movies, Godard it wins that category easily in my opinion. Like the cinematography of Rohmer films is great, but like for example, Godard, there's a lot of philosophical dialogue, just like in My Night at Mauds. But I feel like a lot of the times the Godard film, there's not really a payoff. Like
Mm,
Pascal, like in My Night at Mauds, like Pascal is like they talk about him all the time in the film, but also like the theme of the movie is kind of like it could be like considered an entry into his philosophy. It's so much about his philosophy. Whereas Godard, they just kind of talk about a lot of different philosophers and ideas, but there's not really a movie where I can watch and be like, oh, he's totally talking about like the themes of uh like Sartre or like one of the big time philosophers. Whereas here, did you get what I'm saying? Like this is
mm.
very much more like the movie is completely in line with the philosophy they're talking about. But in Godard, a lot of times they just kind of say famous philosophy lines and whatnot. It's a lot more referential in Godard, whereas here it's a lot more the movie itself and the storyline is like a product of the philosophy.
And that is what ultimately made me love My Night at Mods. It seems like I just kind of to paraphrase what you were saying and how I feel as well is that Romer feels much more focused in his portrayals and also in his theories.
Yes, and that makes for a more exciting movie generally, in my opinion.
Well, absolutely, because it feels like you can fully understand the theory at hand and then deeply explore it on top of that. And like to be able to achieve that with My Night at Mods, like I felt like like it incepted a thought in my head. It helped me understand the thought that was being explained, and then maybe even able to kind of tack onto it myself, right? Like I felt like something
Yeah.
had been achieved with My Night at Mods, whereas and I'm not trying to talk shit on Godard, but he throws a lot of these philosophical theories at you, but not a lot of them are ever going to implant into your head and make you think deeply about them.
Right. Yes. What I just thought of is I think the best way to describe it. The Romer is more like I get it intellectually, the philosophy, but I also it's like it adds another layer because I also relate personally. I can feel like, oh, I've had those kinds of feelings in my life, or this story is seems a little familiar. I just kind of enjoy it more on an emotional level. Whereas Godard, I feel like, is purely intellectual. It's like as if I'm watching the movie and he's trying to teach or lecture me a little bit instead of me experiencing and maybe feeling and relating to the philosophy.
Exactly. Well, Matt, we watched a couple of movies that came out this very year, 2023, and it was kind of a cultural phenomenon of sorts. Some people refer to it as Barbenheimer.
Barbenheimer? Yeah.
Margot Robbie, Ryan Gosling, Cillian Murphy, Robert Downey Jr., Josh Peck. It was pretty awesome. Did you see them both on the same day? Did you watch them on different weekends? What was your Barbenheimer experience like?
So my experience was, I guess it was 2 weekends ago now. I went to see one on Friday, the next one I saw Barbie first on Friday, and then I saw Oppenheimer on Saturday, and I had to see them both extremely late because of how sold out everything was. I saw them both at like 10:30, and by the time Oppenheimer was done, it was like 1:30 a.m.
Holy cowabunga! Yeah, that's pretty crazy. You're near a city, correct? So that makes a lot of sense that they were kind of sold out. I didn't have that issue myself. I was lucky enough, like there was still some seats in our theaters, but that's a long night watching Oppenheimer at 10:30. That's for sure.
It was, but and I'd have to say the only reason that I feel like that may have hurt the movie a little. Don't get me wrong, I still loved it, but like after the nuclear explosion scene happens, it how it kind of winds down a little. That
Mm.
part felt like it dragged for me just because it was like 1 a.m. at that point. I was
Yeah,
like, okay, well, let's just get this over. Come on.
I can totally see where you're coming from. I read your reviews on Barbie, and I don't believe you did not write a review for Oppenheimer. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, no, I didn't for Oppenheimer. My reviews that I write, it's kind of just completely random. Sometimes I just feel like it and I do it.
Yeah. Well, I'll let you state your piece, but I will say one of the big overarching point that you made about Barbie, I have the same exact sentiment that you have, but I'll let you kind of go into how did you like Barbie and what did you kind of think about the story as a whole?
Yeah, so I have a lot of opinions on Barbie. So I thought it was kind of what I expected. I went in, um, the set design when they're in the Barbie world is incredible. It looked like
Mm-hmm.
a mix of like a Wes Anderson and like a Jack Demy. He made those like old French musical movies. It's kind of like a fairy tale land, and it looked very cool. I liked the costume design, um, and I thought, a lot of that was what I expected. When they went into the real world, something about the cinematography changed, and it felt cheap. It
Mm-hmm.
felt like I was watching a commercial
Mm-hmm.
or some kind of like low budget Netflix series. Like when they get to the school, I was like, why is it being filmed so that threw me off. And then, like so kind of what I wrote in my review, this is a movie that has to really appeal to the masses because it's marketed that way. It was marketed as something everyone can go see, kids with their families, girlfriends with their boyfriends, all that. And so I get that the dialogue, at least especially with the points and message they were trying to get across, really has to be like straightforward. But to me, like a lot of what they were saying, the when I started having problems with the movie, it was when that like 15-year-old gives that really weird rant to Barbie, and I just felt like to me when that dialogue came out, I was like, there was no way like Greta Gerwig wrote this and wanted this to, because it's just so like surface level, like it's such a surface level type of like rant and argument, and it almost is like uh it's just like something you would see on like a pop culture like left wing kind of article.
Mm-hmm.
And I just like, for me, I would want the theme of like I would want that message that she said to get across in the movie, because I don't disagree with the message, but it just, when the character literally just states it like that, it just, I'm like, why, like make it a little more intricate. Make me have to piece that message together in my mind. Don't just tell it to me.
Yeah, I absolutely 100% agree, and I think it's look financially it's hella successful. So this is definitely an over exaggeration what I'm gonna say, but I think looking through the lens at time and in the great movies and looking back on this, I think it was a little bit of self sabotage in just directly stating your message. I don't think there's great writing is never just stating your message like that, just, spewing whatever you want the audience to get across like that. And I feel like if you chop out all those scenes, and there's not a whole ton, but one is too much, and it happened more than that. I think there was 3 or 4 times where they just have characters stating the philosophical message that they want to get across. And why that soured me so much is, one, that's just not a great way to do that. And two, because they were doing a really good job with the character dynamics and how the story was playing out, that it wasn't necessary. I feel like there had to be like a message from the top that was like, look, you need to kind of simplify this and distill it, and, you know, make sure people understand it, because this might go over the heads of some. I don't know. I mean, I know Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach, who both were, have writing credits for this movie. They're both very much accredited and acclaimed, and it, like you said, it just seems kind of out of character to do something like that when they have such good writing chops.
Yeah, like the characters, and it was mostly just like the female characters, which is the sad part, 'cause it's supposed to be more. You're supposed to like the female characters more. I feel like they felt more just like mouthpieces for, the message they're trying to get across, rather than like I didn't care about the mom and the daughter because like the movie doesn't really give you a reason to care about them. They just kind of are there to like advance a certain message and plot. So when I was thinking of like a great film that I've seen that is like considered a feminist movie, and it kind of gets the same, it's trying to say like the same message kind of about like how like males are a lot of the times feel entitled to do certain things, or like they should get their way in the world, and it's called like Happiness or La Bonne Here, or I don't know how to say it. It's a Agnes Varda movie, and
Hmm.
in the movie, um, like this husband and wife get married, and it's like the husband's kind of making all the decisions, and they seem happy, but then when they start a family, he immediately goes and like cheats on his wife, and it's like he just feels entitled to do that. Like in the movie, he seems like it's perfectly fine, whereas his wife is suffering. And at the end, she basically ends up like killing herself. And like the whole like that kind, to me, that gets like a really across that perspective of, this like sometimes like the men in a relationship can feel like they can just go around and do whatever they want, like they can be unfaithful and their wife will just stay with them, stuff like that. Like that message has got like to me leaves a way bigger impact when you tell a story like that, where there's a, something really impactful and important happens, and it kind of moves you, and afterwards you start relating it to your head, to your own experiences. But in this movie, it's just like they it's just so obvious, I guess. It's so apparent. There's nothing like after the movie ended, I didn't really want to talk about them, like talk about it and discuss it, because to me there was not much to discuss except I guess the funny scenes. Like the funny parts are what I remembered and talked to people about afterwards. Like, the dojo casa house, all that stuff.
Yeah, I agree. That was like the one thing that I guess surprised me and like stuck out as the kind of really good positive. Character dynamics too, I thought were really good. Aside from the some of the dialogue, which was just kind of like not exposition dumps, but thematic dumps. But you're right. Like I felt the same way when you're talking about the film. It's like I can repeat what they said about it. Some of the online discourse that I did find that was interesting was kind of trying to find some of the less obvious like pieces like as to like, hey, what was Michael Cera's character trying to contribute to the film thematically? And I found that really interesting. But I think whenever you have people kind of stating what some of the messages that the film is trying to get across, it makes all of those little nuances way easier to completely write off, right? Or really not take into consideration, because you're like, they told me everything they wanted me to know, right? So you don't try to look into it much deeper, because like you said, it's being very obvious about what it's doing, and you don't need to look for a deeper meaning when it's already given to you. Does that make sense? And I feel like that was a huge missed opportunity.
Yeah, like I feel like they could have told the story the same way and just gotten rid of all the lines where the characters just kind of like overtly say what's right and what's wrong. And it's like that whole like one of the most common things you hear about movies. Show it, don't tell it. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
what they missed here. You know, they could have kept the same story, the same messages, the same themes, and it would have been better if you would have just told the story, and by telling the story, that whole theme and message should play out and reveal itself to you. You shouldn't you shouldn't have to have characters repeated multiple times. Like you know, you could have made instead of having the daughter like saying all that stuff, you could have just made her character the type of person who, oh, maybe she uh got in, or she was in some kind of class or relationship where that kind of issue came up, and through seeing maybe a little bit of that relationship or class or her belief on the screen, you just see her doing something which tells you, oh, you know, she thinks this about Barbie, or maybe she I don't know, like you could show maybe she used to, I don't know. I'm having a hard time coming up with an example, but I think you get what I'm trying to say.
No, I absolutely do. Matt, I gave this one a 3.5 out of 5, and part of the reason is, funny. Like you said, set design was really good. Costume was really good. I thought Margot Robbie did a good job. I thought Ryan Gosling also did a good job, and I think they're gonna get some credit for sure at the Oscars. And I I never want to like take credits or possible awards. I just feel like if the writing gets a huge, like an Oscar nod, I feel like that might be unrightfully so. That's my take. You may agree with that as well, but let me know what was your rating on this.
I gave this a 3 out of 5. I almost gave it a 3.5, but for me, like what just it took away from that was, you know, kind of what we've been discussing this whole time. That and stuff like when there's a Chevrolet car commercial in the middle of the movie, it takes me out. Honestly, like when that, so it was interesting. So like the movie was going on, and then all of a sudden I see this shot of like the rear of the car, and I'm like, this kind of looks like they must have changed the lens or used a completely different camera because it looked different. And I was like, something looks weird about this. And then all of a sudden, like you see the car start going, and it looks just like a car. It's basically a car commercial with scenes of them in the car, like, you know, freaking out and yelling because it's kind of a car chase scene. But it's like, it just looks so much like a car commercial. And like for the next like 15 or 20 minutes, I was so like taken out of the movie. You know, it just like it's one of those things that when it happens, you're like, oh wait, we're watching a movie here, and this is basically a commercial.
Yeah. No, you're not alone. A lot of people did not appreciate that piece in the movie. I I didn't I didn't even really notice it, but I think had I noticed it, that would have been a huge like red mark on the film for me as well. especially when you combine it with the other negatives we talked about. That would have really soured my opinion on it. But the other movie of the July 21st weekend that came out was Oppenheimer by Christopher Nolan. This is about Robert Oppenheimer, one of the, I guess, great minds behind the atomic bomb. And this kind of points or paints the narrative as to how flawed a person Robert Oppenheimer was, and all of the thoughts that went on as this project was underway and how it completely changed the world after the fact. And personally, I thought this film did a tremendous job of painting the picture of how the world completely changed after the atomic bomb. I think when the bomb went off, that was one of my favorite movie experiences of all time. I really dug this movie. Matt, what was your experience with Oppenheimer?
Well, I go into a Christopher Nolan movie every time like he makes a new one, and I just get excited. I feel like his movies are like pure entertainment. You go in there and like you're in for kind of like a roller coaster ride. It's not like there's a whole Martin Scorsese comment about how like superhero movies are just roller coaster rides or something like that. I don't mean it like that. I meant like I go in and like with his super fast pacing and his music, it just sucks me in usually. Like I am there, I am like engaged, and I could say like from that opening, like right when it opened and it's like talks about like Prometheus said like something about the gods giving us fire, and then that whole explosion, I was like, "Oh boy, here we go." And it was just a trip. Like it was one of those. It was a great Christopher Nolan movie. But then when I think of his other ones, like he's made some great stuff. Like Tenet didn't really do it for me, but like Dunkirk, I loved.
Mm-hmm.
Like The Dark Knight and all the Batman movies, I loved. I think, yeah, this was like a classic entry for Christopher Nolan.
Yeah, this film really solidified him as one of the great directors of our time, in my mind at least. Because for a while, like he was one of my favorite directors, and then I started watching all kinds of different cinema, and he became more and more of an afterthought. And then this comes out, and it's like the first Nolan movie I get to see in theaters while I have like a much larger net of movies that I've seen. And to your point, like I feel like he's really distilled the aspects that make going to the cinema an experience. And to be able to do that is truly special. I don't want to throw any shade at Barbie, but that feels like a film that you can easily watch at home and not feel like you're missing too much. Whereas Oppenheimer, I feel like if you really want to experience this film, it's so worth it to go and see in theaters. I can't state that enough. I think a lot of his films have that same impact. And I think that's what makes him very special as a director.
Yeah, yeah, like it was the same when I went into Dunkirk. Like I
Mm.
walked in like right as the movie was starting, and uh it's just like you get thrown right into that the action and the music, and it's very interesting because he gets a lot of flack about his sound design, but at the same time he gets a lot of love for it because it's so loud and in your face. And I feel like that really works best at the theater. I think if you watch this even at like near full volume on your regular television, it's just not going to be the same experience as going to the theater. I think that if I could name one current director where it's like essential to see their movie at the theater, it would be Christopher Nolan.
Absolutely. And to your point with Dunkirk, you're near the beginning, and then those first gunfires ring out, and it puts you in the film. And then, you have Tom Hardy in the cockpit of one of the airplanes. He was a fighter pilot. And the sound design, it puts you in the plane with him. It's his ability to engross you using his sound design. I do think it is very special. And I know, like you said, he is very polarizing when it comes to that. But it was one of the aspects that made that atomic bomb testing scene so special, because our theater quite literally felt like it was reverberating as the bomb went off, and it made you feel like you could tangibly feel the enormity of this event, and it almost puts you there as though you're watching the bomb, and you can feel how powerful it is, because they build up that scene so much, and the payoff is it's spectacular, and that scene quite literally solidified it for me. But I have to say, I really enjoyed the trial and the ultimate kind of demise, for lack of a better word, of Robert Downey Jr.'s character. It was a really good side piece where I feel like a lot of information was learned on my part, and also like a lot of the performances kind of got the air to shine.
Yeah, like I did not, I went in not expecting the political part of it at all, but I felt like that really added to the movie. And I felt like I learned, something more about history. Like I didn't really know much of who Oppenheimer was, even though I'm been always been really interested in World War II history. But this like taught me more, I guess, about how while we were in World War II, we seemed to be very scared about communism from these other countries, even though I guess like Germany wasn't, they're not really communist. They were their own, you know, Third Reich political party. But it made me realize we were like, as we were fighting these, there was this whole thing going on about communism and being scared of that, and like the Red Scare and McCarthyism. And I remember I learned a little bit about that in history class, but I personally didn't realize the extent of how big of a deal it was. And I think it makes total sense that you had all these mostly European um, engineers and scientists, and they were over here in America helping. And you just got to realize, and this is something you don't really probably think about even when you're studying history, that these guys mostly were communists because their countries that they came from leaned more on the communist side. And so it's like you got to balance, how are we gonna, obviously we're scared of communism, and it was the government's goal to keep that out, but at the same time you've got to try and defeat the Nazis and get this bomb done. So it's like a weird balancing of like what your interests are, or you just gotta, you gotta take the risk, I guess, of communism in order to try and get this bomb built. I thought that whole dynamic was really interesting.
Yeah, I found the ever changing political landscape to be super, super intriguing. How that's depicted in the film, I thought was really well done. And I also found it to be really telling as to how this film was trying to portray Oppenheimer, when the scenario of the Germans surrendering, and then the prospect of, look, we're near the finish line of this bomb. It's become your obsession as like the leader of, trying to create and finish this monumental scientific achievement. But it was like in his mind, Oppenheimer had justified this great creation, because in his mind the Germans were the essential evil in the world, but then they had been conquered, and he kind of has to grapple with the fact that this is going to be used against a completely different enemy, and whether that was right, and also that it was opening the door for it to be used for time to come. That whole it's really well told. It doesn't really take sides. It kind of gives you both sides, which I think if you're ever going to get any political messaging across, I think that's essential. I don't think you can lean one way or another, quite frankly. And I do think that's where Barbie fails, but Oppenheimer succeeds, is that you should really paint a completely open landscape as a side to or instead of just giving one side. I really like that. What were your thoughts, Matt?
Yeah, so and there was just a lot of things going on in this movie, like different facets of interpretation, and I think like one of the best ones was like grappling with the question of was it right to use the nuke he built on Japan rather than his initial target Germany, and then the other part was his that I kind of found the most interesting was how he was grappling with the bomb being used and all that destruction after it happened. Like I think made my possibly my favorite part, maybe except for the explosion or the test explosion that you get to see, is after he's dropped it and he's learning about the impact and he's at that conference and everyone is super like patriotic and they're like we just dropped it on Japan, we saved all these troops lives, and he is just totally out of it. He's obviously he feels a lot of responsibility, and I just that makes you think, wow, like what like one, was it the right thing to do to drop it, and two, you think he spent all that time building this thing, and he obviously wanted it to be used, but that just has drawbacks. Like you're using it to kill people, and when you realize that you were the one that made this device or this bomb that killed like well tens, hundreds of thousands of people, probably over 1 million in the end with all the weird radiation and leukemia it caused. It, it's got to be hard to think to yourself, it's okay because the American government said it was. It's like it's just something hard to grapple with. But then at the time, we probably did end up saving hundreds of thousands of U.S. troops' lives by dropping it. So there's no right answer. So that hard back and forth trying to struggle with that is what was one of my favorite parts of the movie.
How did you like Gary Oldman's portrayal of Truman whenever he meets with Oppenheimer and kind of gives him a different response than what I think people were expecting?
I thought that was interesting. I actually didn't realize that was Gary Oldman until you just said it. But yeah, no, I like that. But I'd say for me actually, the standout performance was Robert Downey Jr. And I think that's just because I didn't even realize that was him until after the movie ended. Because he just like, I think he's one of those actors that can just uh, like adapt and kind of morph based on the character they're playing. Just for the fact that I didn't recognize that was him, even though I've seen Iron Man and all those other movies he's in. I think he did a really really good job.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't know he was in the movie until I started watching the movie, which is funny. Cuz on YouTube I had seen, I think Vanity Fair, they do different stuff. There was a video with Robert Downey and Christopher Nolan. I was like, I wonder, it's like I know Nolan's promoting Oppenheimer, but I wonder what Downey Jr. is doing there. And then he's in the movie. I was completely shocked by that. Huge star power, but like you said, he really sinks into the role. And another thing that I really, really liked, and I think what made me like that character so much, is through about I don't know, say at least 2 hours of the 3 hour runtime, you don't realize that he's like, I don't know, I guess a puppet master, for lack of a better term. And that reveal was awesome, to be sure. And on top of that, I really like the kind of parallel that they draw with Albert Einstein and Oppenheimer towards the end of the film, because I think maybe you can also kind of relate to this. You know a little bit about Albert Einstein, because he's just such a famous name, but you don't know much about him, and they kind of enlighten you as to his story once he is in the U.S. and the parallels between him and Oppenheimer, and how they're kind of taken out of the spotlight despite them being great contributors to the sciences of that time. I loved both of those aspects in this film.
Yeah, yeah. I loved how you got to see all the different scientists as well, how you kind of see all their contributions. Um, yeah, there was just there was a lot more to the movie than just Oppenheimer's story. It's kind of just the story, like even though it could be considered an Oppenheimer biopic, it's also equally a movie about American politics at that time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great performances too. Like a lot of kind of unsung heroes too. Smaller roles that I thought did really, really well. One of them was one of the Safdie brothers who played a Russian scientist. I was like really impressed with him, and he's been in some films himself and done really well, but this one kind of stuck with me for whatever reason. A ton of people just like that didn't have huge roles. Obviously, Cillian Murphy kind of has a lot of the screen time, same as Robert Downey Jr., but a lot of people really maximize their minutes in this film. And the pacing was crazy. And I think the last highlight that I really want to talk about is the fact that I think the editing in this film was hands down one of the best examples of just great editing, because it allowed this film to be able to accomplish a lot and keep the pacing just at a breakneck pace. The editing was just spectacular. Without that, I think this film is completely different and just nowhere near as good.
Yeah, because it does that thing where you're going through different time periods constantly, and if you do that wrong, it can get really confusing. But he did that like perfectly. Like as long as you're paying attention, that part's pretty easy to follow.
And on top of that, this is kind of a thing with Christopher Nolan movies. You have Interstellar, you have Inception, where they do have subject matters where it's kind of built upon theories that aren't like super easy to digest as an audience member. And when they kind of start talking about the actual science behind the bomb, that can get super confusing. And when you're moving at that fast of a pace, I they balanced it so well, because this could have became a muddled, confusing mess where no one really understands what's going on. Yet they kind of were able to do the exact opposite, keep the pacing to where you're engaged the whole time, and on top of that, you feel like you're able to understand something that is kind of higher level stuff. So, great balance was achieved with that.
Yeah, I'd say if you've seen Tenet, I think that's the movie he kind of fails at all that. But I think, this is the exact opposite. He comes out achieving all that because, Tenet, you're very confused. And that's honestly mostly because the sound and the editing in that film and also the topic is just really confusing. Whereas, he could have had the same problems with all that stuff in this movie based on the way he filmed and edited it, but he just executed it uh, way better in this one.
Let me ask you, Matt, what was your rating of Oppenheimer?
I gave Oppenheimer a 4 out of 5 stars.
Alrighty. I gave it a 5 out of 5. And I think it is, well, it's the only five I have for the year so far. It's my favorite to win Best Picture, but there are a few other films coming out this year that look very interesting, like they very well could rival it. A few of those movies are Napoleon, Killers of the Flower Moon, The Killer, Ferrari, and the directors for those, Ridley Scott is doing Napoleon, Scorsese doing Killers of the Flower Moon. The killer is David Fincher, and the last one that I said, Ferrari, is Michael Mann. And those are some big names. Do you think, in your mind, any of those films going to be able to rival Oppenheimer, or have you already seen a film that you think rivals it and would maybe be your favorite of the year so far?
Oh, yeah, no, I haven't. Barbie and Oppenheimer are the only, I'd say, like 2023 movies I've seen so far this year. But in my mind, I think depending on how good they are, uh, the Scorsese or Fincher's movie could end up possibly surpassing it for Best Picture. But I think because of the cultural impact this movie left, like this and Barbie kind of like they've made, I think, more money than almost any movie has any time recently, maybe ever. Um, I think that alone has got to weigh a lot in the Oscar decisions of like what wins Best Picture, and I think Oppenheimer, at my point, and at this point in time, I think it deserves it.
Yeah, it's definitely gonna be amongst my top. At the very, and if those four films are all spectacular, this is still gonna be top five. I haven't seen a film that's rivaled this so far. Like you, I'm very excited for Scorsese and Fincher. I love both of them. I really like Man, and I've seen some films of Ridley Scott that I really enjoy. This has been a great cinematic year, and it's only going to be getting better. But I want to say, Matt, thank you for joining me. This has been a really fun episode and a great recommendation of Eric Rohmer.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've enjoyed discussing this with you.
Thank you all for joining us in the audience. Be sure to like the video, comment your thoughts on all four of the movies that we discussed, and subscribe, and we will catch you on the flippity floop. Bye, y'all.